On the Gods and the World by Salustius. Chapter 1. What the requisites are which an auditor concerning the gods ought to possess, and of common conceptions. It is requisite that those who are willing to hear concerning the gods should have been well informed from their childhood, and not nourished with foolish opinions. It is likewise necessary that they should be naturally prudent and good, that they may receive and properly understand the discourses which they hear. The knowledge likewise of common conceptions is necessary, but common conceptions are such things as all men, when interrogated, acknowledge to be indubitably certain, such as that every god is good, without passivity, and free from all mutation. For everything which is changed is either changed into something better, or changed into something worse, and if into something worse, it will become depraved, but if into something better, it must have been evil in the beginning. Chapter 2. That a god is immutable, without generation, eternal, incorporeal, and has no subsistence in place. And such are the requisites for an auditor of the gods, but the necessary discourses proceed as follows. The essences of the gods are neither generated, for eternal natures are without generation, and those beings are eternal who possess a first power and are naturally void of passivity. Nor are their essences composed from bodies, for even the powers of bodies are incorporeal, nor are they comprehended in place, for this is the property of bodies, nor are they separated from the first cause, or from each other, in the same manner as intellections are not separated from intellect, nor sciences from the soul. Chapter 3. Concerning fables, that these are divine, and on what account they are so. On what account, then, the ancients, neglecting such discourses as these, employed fables, is a question not unworthy of our investigation. And this indeed is the first utility arising from fables, that they excite us to inquiry, and do not suffer our cognitive power to remain in indolent rest. It will not be difficult, therefore, to show that fables are divine, from those by whom they are employed, for they are used by poets agitated by divinity, by the best of philosophers, and by as such disclose initiatory rites. In oracles also fables are employed by the gods. But why fables are divine is the part of philosophy to investigate. Since therefore all things rejoice in similitude, and are averse from dissimilitude, it is necessary that discourses concerning the gods should be as similar to them as possible, that they may become worthy of their essence, and that they may render the gods propitious to those who discourse concerning them, all which can only be effected by fables. Fables, therefore, imitate the gods, according to effable and ineffable, unapparent and apparent, wise and ignorant. And this likewise extends to the goodness of the gods. For as the gods impart the goods of sensible natures in common to all things, but the goods resulting from intelligibles to the wise alone, so fables assert to all men that there are gods, but who they are, and of what kind, they alone manifest to such as are capable of so exalted a knowledge. In fables, too, the energies of the gods are imitated, for the world may very properly be called a fable, since bodies and the corporeal possessions which it contains are apparent, but souls and intellects are occult and invisible. Besides, to inform all men of the truth concerning the gods produces contempt in the unwise from their incapacity of learning, and negligence in the studious. But concealing truth in fables prevents the contempt of the former, and compels the latter to philosophize. But you will ask why adulteries, thefts, paternal bonds, and other unworthy actions are celebrated in fables. Nor is this unworthy of admiration, that where there is an apparent absurdity, the soul immediately conceiving these discourses to be concealments may understand that the truth which they contain is to be involved in profound and occult silence. Chapter 4. That there are 5 species of fables, and examples of each. Of fables, some are theological, others physical, others animastic or belonging to soul, others material, and lastly others mixed from these. Fables are theological, which employ nothing corporeal, but speculate the very essences of the gods, such as the fable which asserts that Saturn devoured his children, for it obscurely imitates the nature of an intellectual god, since every intellect returns into itself. But we speculate fables physically when we speak concerning the energies of the gods about the world, as when considering Saturn the same as time, and calling the parts of time the children of the universe, we assert that the children are devoured by their parents. But we employ fables in an animastic mode when we contemplate the energies of the soul, because the intellections of our souls, though by a discursive energy they proceed into other things, yet abide in their parents. Lastly, fables are materials such as the Egyptians ignorantly employ, considering and calling corporeal natures divinities, such as Isis earth, Osiris humidity, Typhon heat, or again denominating Saturn water, Adonis fruits, and Bacchus wine. And indeed, to assert that these are dedicated to the gods in the same manner as herbs and stones and animals is the part of wise men, but to call them gods is alone the province of madmen, unless we speak in the same manner as when, from established custom, we call the orb of the sun and its rays the sun itself. But we may perceive the mixed kind of fables, as well in many other particulars, as in the fable which relates that discord at a banquet of the gods threw a golden apple, and that a dispute about it arising among the goddesses, they were sent by Jupiter to take judgment of Paris, who, charmed with the beauty of Venus, gave her the apple in preference to the rest. For in this fable the banquet denotes the supermundane powers of the gods, and on this account they subsist in conjunction with each other, but the golden apple denotes the world, which, on account of its composition from contrary natures, is not improperly said to be thrown by discord or strife. But again, since different gifts are imparted to the world by different gods, they appear to contest with each other for the apple, and a soul living according to sense, for this is Paris, not perceiving other powers in the universe, asserts that the contended apple subsists alone through the beauty of Venus. But of these species of fables, such as are theological belong to philosophers, the physical and animastic to poets, but the mixed to initiatory rites, since the intention of all mystic ceremonies is to conjoin us with the world and the gods. But if it be requisite to relate another fable, we may employ the following with advantage. It is said that the mother of the gods, perceiving Attis by the river Gallus, became in love with him, and, having placed on him a starry hat, lived afterwards with him in intimate familiarity. But Attis, falling in love with a nymph, deserted the mother of the gods, and entered into association with the nymph. Through this, the mother of the gods caused Attis to become insane, who, cutting off his genital parts, left them with the nymph, and then returning again to his pristine connection with the goddess. The mother of the gods, then, is the vivific goddess, and on this account is called mother, but Attis is the demiurgus of natures conversant with generation and corruption, and hence his is said to be found by the river Gallus, for Gallus denotes galaxy or milky circle, from which a passive body descends to the earth. But since primary gods, perfect such as are secondary, the mother of the gods, falling in love with Attis, imparts to him celestial powers, for this is the meaning of the starry hat. But Attis loves a nymph, and nymphs preside over generation. For everything in generation flows. But because it is necessary that the flowing nature of generation should be stopped, lest something worse than things last should be produced, in order to accomplish this, the demiurgus of generable and corruptible natures, sending prolific powers into the realms of generation, is again conjoined with the gods. But these things indeed never took place at any particular time, because they have a perpetuity of subsistence, and intellect contemplates all things as subsisting together. But discourse considers this thing as first, and that as second, in order of existence. Hence, since a fable most aptly corresponds to the world, how is it possible that we, who are imitators of the world, can be more gracefully ornamented than by the assistance of fable? For through this we observe a festive day, and in the first place, we ourselves falling from the celestial regions, and associating with a nymph, the symbol of generation, live immersed in sorrow, abstaining from corn and other gross and sordid aliment, since everything of this kind is contrary to the soul. Afterwards, the incisions of a tree and fasting succeed, as if we would amputate from our nature all farther progress of generation. At length we employ the nutriment of milk, as if passing by this means into a state of regeneration. And lastly, festivity and crowns, and a reascent, as it were, to the god succeed. But the truth of all this is confirmed by the time in which these ceremonies take place, for they are performed about spring and the equinoctial period, when natures and generation cease to be any longer generated, and the days are more extended than the nights, because this period is accommodated to ascending souls. But the rape of Proserpine is fabled to have taken place about the opposite equinoctial, and this rape alludes to the descent of souls. And thus much concerning the mode of considering fables, to our discourse on which subject may both the gods and the souls of the writers of fables be propitious. Chapter 5. Concerning the first cause. After this, it is requisite that we should know the first cause, and the orders of gods posterior to the first, together with the nature of the world, of intellect, soul, and essence. Likewise, that we should speculate providence, fate, and fortune, virtue and vice, and the good and evil forms of republics produced from these. And lastly, that we should consider from whence evil crept into the world. And though each of these requires many and very extended discourses, yet there is no reason why we may not discuss these subjects with brevity, lest mankind should be totally destitute of the knowledge they contain. It is necessary, then, that the first cause should be one, for the monad presides over all multitude, excelling all things in power and goodness, and on this account it is necessary that all things should participate of its nature. For nothing can hinder its energies through power, and it will not separate itself from anything on account of the goodness which it possesses. But if the first cause were soul, all things would be animated. If intellect, all things would be intellectual. If essence, all things would participate of essence, which last some perceiving to subsist in all things, have taken on occasion to denominate him essence. If, then, things had nothing besides being, and did not also possess goodness, this assertion would be true. But if being subsists through goodness, and participate of the good, it is necessary that the first cause should be superessential, and the good. But the truth of this is most eminently evinced in souls endowed with virtue, and through good neglecting the care of their being, when they expose themselves to the most imminent dangers for their country or friends, or in the cause of virtue. But after this ineffable power, the orders of the gods succeed. Chapter 6. Concerning the supermundane and mundane gods. But of the gods, some are mundane and others supermundane. I call those mundane who fabricate the world, but of the supermundane, some produce essences, others intellect, and others soul, and on this account they are distinguished into three orders, in discourses concerning which orders it is easy to discover all the gods. But of the mundane gods, some are the causes of the world's existence, others animate the world, others again harmonize it, thus composed from different natures, and others lastly guard and preserve it when harmonically arranged. And since these orders are four, and each consists from things first, middle, and last, it is necessary that the disposers of these should be 12. Hence Jupiter, Neptune, and Vulcan fabricate the world. Ceres, Juno, and Diana animate it. Mercury, Venus, and Apollo harmonize it. And lastly, Vesta, Minerva, and Mars preside over it with a guardian power. But the truth of this may be seen in statues as in enigmas. For Apollo harmonizes the lyre, Pallas is invested with arms, and Venus is naked, since harmony generates beauty, and beauty is not concealed in objects of sensible inspection. But since these gods primarily possess the world, it is necessary to consider the other gods as subsisting in these, as Bacchus in Jupiter, Asclepius in Apollo, and the Graces in Venus. We may likewise behold the orbs with which they are connected, i.e. Vesta with earth, Neptune with water, Juno with air, and Vulcan with fire. But the 6 superior gods we denominate from general custom, for we assume Apollo and Diana for the sun and moon, but we attribute the orb of Saturn to Ceres, ether to Pallas, and we assert that heaven is common to all of them. The orders, therefore, powers, and spheres of the 12 gods are thus unfolded by us and celebrated, as in a sacred hymn. Chapter 7. On the nature and perpetuity of the world. It is necessary that the world should be incorruptible and unbegotten. Incorruptible, for this being corrupted, it must either produce one better, or one worse, or disordered confusion. But if by corruption it becomes worse, its artificer must be evil, who thus changes it from better to worse. But if it becomes better, its artificer must be defective in power, because he did not fabricate it better at first. But if through corruption he changes into the same state as before, he labors in vain. And it is not lawful to assert that he changes into nothing but disorder and confusion. From all this it is sufficiently evident that the world is unbegotten. For if it be incapable of corruption, it is unbegotten, since every thing generated is also corrupted. We may likewise add that since the world subsists through the goodness of divinity, it is necessary that divinity should always be good, and the world perpetually endure. Just in the same manner as light is coexistent with the sun and fire, and the shadow with its forming body. But of the bodies contained in the world, some imitate intellect and revolve in a circle, but others soul and are moved in a right line. And of those which are moved in a right line, fire and air are impelled upwards, but water and earth downwards. But of those which revolve in a circle, the inerratic sphere commences its motion from the east, but the 7 planets are carried in their orbits from the west. But of this there are many causes, among which the following is not the least: that, if there was but one rapid period of orbs, generation would be imperfect, but since there is a diversity of motion, it is also requisite that there should be a difference in the nature of bodies. It is, besides this, necessary that a celestial body should neither burn nor produce cold, nor generate anything which is the property of the 4 elements. But since the world is a sphere, which the zodiac evinces, and in every sphere the inferior part is the middle, for it is every way much distant from the surface, hence heavenly bodies are impelled downwards and are driven to earth, and all these indeed the gods fabricate. Intellect orderly disposes, and soul perpetually moves, and thus much concerning the gods. Chapter 8. Concerning intellect and soul, and that soul is immortal. But there is a certain power subordinate to essence, but prior to soul, from essence indeed deriving its being, but perfecting soul, in the same manner as the sun perfects corporeal sight. And of souls some are rational and immortal, but others are irrational and immortal. And the first of these are produced from the first, but the second from the second order of gods. But in the first place, let us investigate the definition of soul. Soul, then, is that by which animated natures differ from such as are inanimate. But they differ through motion, sense, fantasy, and intelligence. The irrational soul, therefore, is sensitive and fantastic life, but the rational soul is that which rules over sense and fantasy, and uses reason in its energies. And the irrational soul indeed is subservient to the corporeal passions, for it desires without reason, and is inflamed with anger. But the rational soul, through the assistance of reason, despises the body, and contending with the irrational soul, when it conquers, produces virtue, but when it is conquered, vice. But it is necessary that the rational soul should be immortal, because it knows the gods, for nothing mortal knows that which is immortal. Besides this, it despises human concerns as foreign from its nature, and has a disposition contrary to bodies, as being itself incorporeal. Add too that when the body with which a soul is connected is beautiful and young, then the soul is oppressed and its vigor is diminished. But when this grows old, the soul revives and increases in strength and vigor. And every worthy soul uses intellect, but intellect is not generated by body, for how can things destitute of intellect generate intellect? But, employing the body as an instrument, it does not subsist in body, in the same manner as no artificer of machines subsists in his machines, and yet many of these, without anyone touching them, are moved from place to place. We ought not to wonder if the rational soul is often led astray by the body, for arts themselves, when their instruments are damaged, are incapable of operation. Chapter 9. Concerning Providence, Fate, and Fortune. From hence also we may perceive the providence of the gods, for how could order be inserted in the world if there be no one who distributes it in order? From hence, too, could all things be produced for the sake of something, as, for instance, the irrational soul, that there might be sense, the rational, that the earth might be adorned. From natural effects, likewise, we may perceive the operations of providence, for it has constructed eyes of a diaphanous nature for the purpose of seeing, but nostrils above the mouth, that we might distinguish disagreeable smells, and of the teeth, the middle are fashioned sharp for the purpose of cutting, but those situated in the more interior part of the mouth are broad for the purpose of bruising the aliment in pieces. And thus we may perceive in all things that nothing is constructed without reason and design. But since so much providence is displayed in the last of things, it is impossible that it should not subsist in such as are first. Besides, divinations and the healing of bodies take place from the beneficent providence of the gods. And it is necessary to believe that a similar concern about the world is exerted by the gods, without either expecting reward or enduring labor in the exertion, but that as bodies endued with power produce essentially, or by their very essence, that which they produce, as the sun illuminates and heats by that which he is alone, so the providence of the gods, by a much greater reason, without labor and difficulty to itself, confers good on the subjects of its providential exertions. So that by this means the objections of the Epicureans against providence are dissolved. For, say they, that which is divine is neither the cause of molestation to itself nor to others. And such is the incorporeal providence of the gods about bodies and souls. But the beneficent exertion of the gods resulting from and subsisting in bodies is different from the former, and is called fate, because its series is more apparent in bodies, and for the sake of which also the mathematical art was invented. That human affairs, therefore, and particularly a corporeal nature, are not only directed by the gods, but from divine bodies also, is highly consonant to reason and truth, and hence reason dictates that health and sickness, prosperous and adverse fortune, proceed from these according to every one's particular deserts. But to refer injustice and crimes committed through lasciviousness and wantonness to fate leaves us indeed good, but the gods evil and base, unless one should endeavor to remove this consequence by replying that everything which the world contains, and whatever has natural subsistence, is good, but that the nature which is badly nourished, or which is of a more imbecile condition, changes the good proceeding from fate into something worse. just as the sun, though it is good itself, becomes noxious to the blear-eyed and feverish. For on what account do the Massagetae devour their parents, the Hebrews use circumcision, and the Persians preserve their nobility? But how can astrologers call Saturn and Mars noxious, and yet celebrate these planets as beneficent, by asserting that philosophy, kingdoms, and military command are their gifts? If they assign triangles and squares as the cause, it is absurd that human virtue should everywhere remain the same, but that the gods should be subject to mutation from diversity of places. But that nobility or ignobility of parents may be predicted from the stars shows that they do not produce all things, but only signify some, by their different situations and aspects. For how can things which subsist prior to generation be produced from generation? As therefore providence and fate subsist about nations and cities, as likewise about every individual of humankind, so also fortune, about which it is now requisite to speak. Fortune, therefore, must be considered as a power of the gods, disposing things differently from each other, and happening contrary to expectation, to beneficent purposes, and on this account it is proper that cities should celebrate this goddess in common, since every city is composed from different particulars. But this goddess holds her dominion in the sublunary concerns, since everything fortuitous is excluded from the regions above the moon. But if the evil enjoy prosperous fortune, and the worthy are oppressed with want, there is nothing wonderful in such a dispensation. For the former consider riches as all things, but they are despised by the latter, and besides this, prosperous events do not diminish the depravity of the evil, but virtue is alone sufficient to the good. Chapter 10. Concerning Virtue and Vice. But in discoursing on the soul, it is requisite to speak of virtue and vice. For while the irrational soul, proceeding into bodies, immediately produces anger and desire, the rational soul, presiding over these, causes the whole soul to receive a tripartite division, that is, into reason, anger, and desire. Note, logos, thumos, epithumia. But the virtue of reason is prudence, of anger, fortitude, of desire, temperance, and of the whole soul, justice. For it is requisite that reason should judge what is fit and becoming, that anger, listening to the persuasions of reason, should despise things apparently horrible, and that desire should pursue that which is attended with reason, and not that which is apparently pleasant. And when the parts of the soul are in this condition, a just life is the result. For justice respecting possessions is but a small part of virtue. Hence, in well-educated men, you will perceive all of these in amicable conjunction. But in the uncultivated, one is bold and unjust, another is prudent and intemperate, all which you cannot call virtues, because they are destitute of reason, imperfect, and belong to certain irrational animals. But vice is to be considered from contraries. For the vice of reason is folly, of anger, fear, of desire, intemperance, and of the whole soul, injustice. But virtues are produced from an upright polity, and from a well-ordered education and instruction, but vices from an opposite process. Chapter 11. Concerning a good and depraved polity. But the forms of polities are produced according to the triple division of the soul. For the rulers are assimilated to reason, the soldiers to anger, and the common people to desire. Hence, when all things are administered according to reason, and he who is the best of all men possesses dominion, then a kingdom is produced. But when, from reason and anger in conjunction, more than one hold the reins of government, an aristocracy is produced. But where the government is carried on through desire, and honor subsists with a view to possessions, such a polity is called a timocracy. And that polity which takes place in opposition to a kingdom is called a tyranny. For the former administers everything, but the latter nothing, according to reason. But an oligarchy, or the dominion of the few, is contrary to an aristocracy, because in the former not the best, but a few only, and those the worst, govern the city. And lastly, a democracy is opposed to a timocracy, because in the former, not such as abound in riches, but the multitude alone is the ruler of all things.